HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Big Liars, What Psychological Science Tells Us About Lying, and How You Can Avoid Being Duped. APA Life Tools Series. By Christian L. Hart, Ph.D., and Drew A. Curtis, Ph.D. Read by Justin Price. Preface. A man is never more truthful than when he acknowledges himself a liar. Mark Twain. Human civilization rests vulnerably on the foundational assumption that when people speak, they generally tell the truth. No human endeavors of consequence would take shape without trust holding people together in the pursuit of common goals. The idea that humanity is built on faith in the honesty of others may seem absurd when one considers that rampant lying is an indisputable feature in society. Not only is lying common, it is also widely tolerated, and it is sometimes viewed as the right thing to do. Though honesty is widely touted as a fundamental goal in human interactions, in practice, people do not communicate completely honestly all of the time. In fact, much of the time they do not. When telling the truth feels inconvenient, people resort to less honest communication. They steer conversations away from certain topics. They feign ignorance. They withhold key details. They intentionally use vague or misleading words, or sometimes they just flat out lie. And as you are likely aware, some people lie much more often or with much greater effect than others. We call them big liars. Goals. Our aim in this book is to provide a general audience with an accessible synthesis of the scholarly work on lying, with a particular focus on individuals in our society who seem to lie extraordinarily. When we, the authors, use the concept of big liars, we are referring to people who lie with much greater frequency than the typical person, as well as to people who tell enormous lies that have a substantial impact on the people around them. In essence, big liars are people who lie extraordinarily, and for whom lying is a defining feature. We hope to show the listener who the big liars are, what makes them tick, how their lying affects relationships and society, and how they can be dealt with. There are a great number of books on lying, each with a unique perspective. This one stands apart in some key ways. Many books fail to address the issue that most people are quite honest, while a small subset of the population is very deceitful. These prodigious liars pose the greatest threat. Big liars destroy lives through duplicitous romantic relationships, conniving business relationships, and all other manner of disingenuous exchanges. We hope to provide a full account of the grand deceivers in our midst. Additionally, this book presents a scientific rather than a purely anecdotal perspective. Stories are interesting and instructive, but careful scientific analysis can help us see things more clearly, allowing us to separate fact from fiction. There is an overwhelming amount of fascinating scientific findings on deception and liars. However, much of this work is available only in scholarly scientific journals or dense academic books. We synthesize much of the scientific evidence into accessible narratives and weave those narratives with real-life stories into a gripping analysis of big liars. Each person forms their own moral boundary, deciding when it is best to be honest and when a little dishonesty would be more prudent. Our central thesis is that almost everyone is dishonest sometimes, and that dishonesty is usually fairly harmless. We even ponder whether a certain degree of dishonesty may serve important roles in society and in normal social relationships. However, some people step well out of the bounds of normality and use profuse, malevolent deception to manipulate others for their own gain. We hope that by closely analyzing those people who use deception as their principal mode in life, we can help listeners learn to deal with them more effectively. Our goal in writing this book was to examine how big liars differ from the more honest types. Researchers now know enough about colossal liars to provide some accuracy in determining who lies, how big liars are created, how big liars operate, how people can become more honest, and how everyone can avoid being manipulated by liars. We offer helpful advice to the many people who are harmed by big liars. We hope to help listeners understand the challenges in detecting liars, as well as the prospects of reducing or eliminating lying in important contexts and relationships. Perhaps by studying the big liars among us, everyone can also learn a bit about our own strained relationships with honesty and the truth. Structure. In Chapter 1, we make the case that big liars are profoundly more dishonest than the typical person. We explore the variables that distinguish big liars from everyone else, examining innate biological differences, differences shaped by the cultures and contexts in which people were reared and live, differences in personal philosophies, and differences in key personality traits. We also posit a theory that explains who the big liars are, as well as why they lie so prolifically and monumentally. In Chapter 2, we try to unravel the origin story of the big liars by exploring their childhood development. We track the emergence of lying early in childhood and the trajectories that lead some to transition into honest adults while others gravitate toward deceit. Chapter 3 delves into the world of people who play loose with the truth. Storytellers, exaggerators, pathological liars, and psychopaths all spread questionable information. We try to figure out what distinguishes these various groups of untruthful people, ultimately discerning who is a big liar and who is not. In Chapter 4, we consider the big lies of scam artists and the sanctioned lies of lawyers, doctors, and politicians. We explore examples of big liars who work as law enforcement officers, corporate executives, salespeople, preachers, and other occupations. As it turns out, most professions have their big liars. Chapter 5 uncovers how big liars operate in relationships. Some people always hold close to the truth in their relationships, while others are unmoored to veracity and are willing to sail far out into the sea of deceit. We have considerable information about how lying unfolds in different types of relationships, the interventions that can reduce lying, and the ways in which social relationships are fractured by deception. We review research findings about prolific lying in romantic relationships and in other familial relationships, and among friends. Our fraught relationship with lies and liars is a natural outcome of a tension between wanting to have fair and forthright relationships with others and simultaneously acknowledging the difficulty and perils of being completely transparent with all people all the time. Chapter 6 examines how big liars pull it off. How do people convincingly spew untruths? A growing body of anecdotal and empirical evidence reveals how big liars practice their craft, avoid detection, and get away with their misdeeds. We explain some of our research that has examined the self-reported techniques that people use to tell believable lies. As it turns out, how these liars alter their behavior to seem more believable is the opposite of what most people are looking for when trying to detect if someone is lying to them. Chapter 7 examines the motivations that drive big liars. We also cut to the core of what leads some to be faithfully honest at all times with all people, yet leads others to be just as devoutly deceptive. We address the question of whether big liars simply have no moral compass, or whether something unusual in their childhood set them apart from other people, warping their assessment of right and wrong. It turns out that not all profound liars deceive out of some nefarious attempt to gain an advantage. Compassion and fear are just as likely to drive people away from honesty and into a spiral of lies. Chapter 8 explores the consequences of extreme lying, both for the big liars and for those who interact with them. Lying can have devastating effects in any domain, from romantic relationships to friends and family or the workplace. We discuss the costs big liars impose on everyone else. Chapter 9 assesses the state of the field of lie detection. It's not possible to attach every person in our lives to a lie detector, but are there more subtle verbal and behavioral cues that give away liars' deceit? We separate the myths from the reality about lie detection. Finally, Chapter 10 provides guidance and advice on how people can avoid being duped by big liars. While there is no surefire way to avoid being deceived by others, there are several psychological adjustments that everyone can make that minimize our susceptibility to being duped. Cases. Throughout this book, we present numerous cases describing individuals who are liars themselves or who have dealt with liars in their lives. We hold compassion, concern, and respect for these people who were generously willing to share their accounts for our benefit. Unless they wanted to be identified, we have preserved their privacy and confidentiality, withholding their true names and other identifying information. Our aim in sharing these cases is to help the listener better understand extraordinary liars through specific, real-world examples. Chapter 1. A World Awash with Liars. Man is not what he thinks he is what he hides. André Malraux. In 2009, during President Barack Obama's joint address to Congress, Representative Joe Wilson did not agree with what the president was saying about health care reforms. In front of everyone seated in the chamber of the House of Representatives, and in front of a live television audience of millions, Wilson yelled at the president, "You lie!" The insult echoed through the chamber and into Americans' living rooms. Had Wilson cast such an aspersion 2 centuries earlier, he would have been risking his own life. Earlier in America's history, an accusation that someone was a liar was the central insult leading to most duels. The prevailing view was that, among men of honor, to have one's honesty and integrity questioned was the gravest of all insults. That form of tarnish on one's reputation was so damaging in social and business matters that one was left with no option other than to strike down the person who had defamed them. If someone accused another of being a liar, the recourse was to defend one's character by dutifully attempting to kill the accuser. Representative Wilson's accusation did not lead to a duel. Admonished by politicians from both parties, Wilson quickly and publicly apologized for his insult, seeking forgiveness for his impropriety. President Obama noted the offense and accepted Wilson's apology, saying, "I'm a big believer that we all make mistakes. He apologized quickly and without equivocation, and I'm appreciative of that." There would be no need for firearms in settling the matter. In this book, we throw around the label big liar without much consideration of honor, reputation, and hurt feelings, and without much fear of being challenged to a duel when we pin the label on some people. These days, claims of truth and falsity tend to be resolved through open debate, and disputes about whether someone is a liar or a straight shooter generally don't devolve into mortal combat. Fortunately, we live in a time in which we can openly consider the facts about lying and liars. We can discuss who the big liars are, and we can examine why they are so dishonest. Lying is now an open topic of scientific inquiry. When was the last time you told a lie? What was the lie about? Did you tell your boss that you were sick at home when you were actually relaxing poolside? Did you tell your spouse that you liked something more than you really did? Did you say to someone, "It's good to see you too," when it wasn't particularly good to see them? Most people are sporadic liars. Whether they intend to or not, most find themselves occasionally dropping bits of falsity into conversations. More often than not, those little lies are relatively benign and trivial untruths used to spare someone's feelings or to facilitate polite social conversations. Few would be morally outraged if they discovered those white lies. However, Other times the lies hold tremendous weight, concealing the most despicable truths. The world is awash in the lies of 8 billion people. With every little falsehood, each of us contributes a few drops to that sea of deception. While everyone is prone to bend the truth on occasion, some people lay out lies with such frequency that they seem entirely severed from any need or ability to speak the truth or to share genuine versions of themselves with others. Those profuse prevaricators spew lies with complete abandon, often leaving a wake of broken hearts, chafed coworkers, and exasperated friends and family. Other liars are conspicuous because of the gravity of their lies. They tell extremely consequential lies that upend the lives of everyone around them. This book is about lying in general, but it focuses on the big liars, those few people who use lies as one of their principal strategies for navigating life. By telling lies prolifically or by telling enormously consequential lies, they warp our understanding of reality. If you peruse the news on any given day, you will likely come across stories of people who made headlines because of their lies. Every day, journalists track the veracity of statements by politicians, pointing out each instance in which this congressman twisted the truth or that president told a bald-faced lie. Some statements by politicians are deemed to be gentle varnishings of the truth, while others fall into the pants-on-fire realm. Financial leaders are jailed after being caught red-handed in their fraudulent schemes. Industry titans are dethroned when they are found misleading investors about the bottom line or lying to customers about the effectiveness or safety of their products. Religious leaders are defrocked when they are discovered conning the faithful or weaving untruths to conceal their own sinful escapades. Big liars make great headlines. Jessica Vega is one example of a little-known person who rose to a certain degree of notoriety because of her big lies. Jessica was a 25-year-old living in New York. She and her boyfriend, Michael, had been together for a while and had a kid together. She had dreams of having a fancy wedding with a nice dress, flowers, and all the rest. But she and Michael couldn't afford it, at least on their own income. She was aware that people were often generous toward people who were dying, so she decided just to tell people she was not long for this world. She claimed that she had been diagnosed with leukemia and that doctors had told her she only had 5 months to live. She produced a forged letter from a doctor confirming that leukemia would soon end her life. She even lied to her boyfriend, convincing him that he would soon be raising their child on his own. She stated that before she died, she wanted to have a nice wedding and marry her boyfriend. Plans for a lovely wedding soon got underway. She lied to the owner of a wedding dress shop about her terminal affliction. The owner felt desperate to help and generously gave Jessica a $1,500 dress, a seamstress to take care of any alterations, and some nice shoes. Jessica had shaved her head to make a more convincing case for her leukemia, so someone donated a new wig for her to wear at the wedding. Another person donated a set of wedding rings. Someone else donated a stay in Aruba for the honeymoon. Others donated plane tickets for the flight. Someone else, touched by her story, paid for a wedding photographer. Many came to her aid, donating cash. As one person duped by her lies said, "It seemed so genuine. I never questioned it." Finally, the day arrived, and Jessica celebrated the wedding she had always hoped for. However, not long after they wed, her husband Michael started to grow suspicious about her illness. He did a little investigating and found that the letter from the doctor was a forgery. His wife was not dying and did not have leukemia. As Michael put it, Jessica lied about everything, and she's not sick. She pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. Jessica was arrested and charged with 6 felonies. Michael divorced her. In total, Jessica's lies netted her many thousands of dollars in donations for her wedding. As the prosecutors contended, By pretending to have a terminal illness, Vega inexcusably took advantage of the community's hearts and minds and profited off of their generosity, adding that our office will hold this individual accountable for fleecing the public through lies and deception. In court, Jessica admitted to making it all up. She apologized. She spent some time in jail and was ordered to pay back all her victims. Stories about big liars like Jessica Vega can be found in news stories around the world almost daily. We need not look to the news to find big liars, though. They are all around us, from the uncle whose every story is a self-aggrandizing exaggeration to the romantic partner who professes love each day but has devoted their heart to another. Everyone probably has stories about big liars we have crossed paths with. Sometimes when we discover a big liar, we can avoid their deceit by simply avoiding them. Other times we are forced to deal with their dishonesty because they are at our workplace, in our social circles, or in our families. What is a lie? Before we discuss lying in more depth, we first address exactly what a lie is. People get caught up in semantics about what counts as lying and what does not, so it's important to be crystal clear about how we define lying. All untrue statements are not lies. Sometimes people are simply misinformed or mistaken. If someone mistakenly says, Thomas Jefferson was the second president, though it was actually John Adams, most will consider that a mistake, not a lie. If we consider the distinction between a lie and a mistake, we immediately recognize what distinguishes the two. It is the intention. If someone wanted you to fail your history test, so they intentionally misinformed you that Thomas Jefferson was the second president, they would be lying. Only the intention to mislead separates the mistake from the lie. Most dictionary definitions of lying capture this element of intent, with definitions such as to make an untrue statement with intent to deceive. More broadly, people tend to see intent as a central feature of most immoral wrongdoing. Otherwise, they treat the incident as a mere accident or oversight. Thus, deception researchers also place intent as a central criterion of lying. But things get more complicated. Consider the following situation. Brian's girlfriend, Shannon, asks him what he did last night. Brian says that he stayed at home and watched television, which he actually did. What Brian left out, though, is that he also invited his ex-girlfriend over and they had sex. Did Brian lie? After all, he said nothing that was untrue. Does omitting some important fact constitute a lie? If so, are we lying when a kid asks how we like their drawing, and we say something like, I like the way you made the person green, but we don't say, I think this looks weird and amateurish. Many people view such attempts to intentionally exclude information with the intent to mislead as lies of omission. What if Shannon asks Brian what he is going to do today? Secretly, Brian has made plans for his ex-girlfriend to come over and have sex again. He tells Shannon, I'm just going to hang out at home alone. As it turns out, Brian's ex-girlfriend never arrives for their clandestine dalliance. Could we say that Brian lied? Sure, he intended to lie, but what he told Shannon turned out to be true. So, did he lie? By most definitions, he had lied because he believed that what he was saying was untrue when he said it. So, the reality of the world is not as pertinent to defining a lie as the belief and intention of the liar is. Some philosophers have argued for a broader definition that dispenses with the criterion that a lie must be a statement that is untrue. They prefer that lies be defined as statements intended to deceive, whether those statements are technically true or not. Likewise, using language that is technically true but intentionally misleading would also be viewed as a lie. For instance, if I said, you should be aware that John drinks at work, you might be concerned about John's alcohol problem. While my statement is technically true, John actually drinks water at work all day long. My language was chosen to erroneously paint John in a negative light. In a real-life example of misleading language, President Clinton contended that he had been honest when he said, "There's nothing going on between us," when referring to his sexual affair with Monica Lewinsky. He argued that the truth or falsity of the statement depends on what the meaning of the word is. For the most part, then, the broad definition of lies, statements intended to deceive, seems to capture most examples of what people consider to be lies. People also deceive with their silence. Imagine that you find a wallet in the gym and you put it in your pocket. A couple of minutes later, someone asks, "Hey, has anyone seen a wallet around here?" You remain silent. Have you lied? If intentional silence is used to communicate a deceptive meaning, we view that silence as a type of lie. Silence is just another way we communicate untruths. Looking at the various definitions of lying, we can see three key common criteria. The first is that there must be a communication, usually by speaking words, but also via sign language, gestures, the pen, social media posts, smoke signals, silence, and so on. The second criterion is that the communicator must believe that what they are communicating is not the full truth that one would expect in such a situation. The third condition is that the communicator intends for their communication to be misleading. With those criteria in mind, we prefer to define a lie as an intentionally misleading communication meant to create untrue beliefs. This definition includes lying as one form of deception, a form that hinges on the intentionally dishonest use of communication, whether wholly untrue, misleading, or omitted. For most practical purposes, we can stick with the shorthand. A lie is a communication intended to deceive. At its core, a lie is simply an attempt to persuade. People all have goals. They use lies to help achieve those goals. Lying is just one form of social manipulation, and it is a rare form at that. It is useful to think of lying not as a unique, dastardly tactic. Instead, it is one of the many tools people use to try to influence others to get what they want in life. Defining big liars. With lying sufficiently defined, we now consider big liars. We define big liars as people who tell big lies or who lie frequently. Some people manage to accomplish both. Our definition has two elements. First, big liars can be defined as people who tell big lies. By big lies, we mean lies that are extremely consequential and are likely to produce substantial effects, often disastrous ones. This definition is somewhat idiosyncratic because it hinges on a subjective evaluation of the consequences of a lie. Nonetheless, most people can readily recall someone whose lies caused massive problems. A business owner who finds out that her co-owner has been lying about company profits for years would surely view her betrayer as a big liar. A man who is scammed out of his life savings would similarly identify the perpetrator as a big liar. Likewise, a political leader who uses a lie with calamitous effects would undoubtedly be labeled a big liar by many of their constituents. Big liars who tell massive lies are defined subjectively by the impact their lies have on others. Those subjective outcomes are difficult to calculate scientifically. Instead of using a scientific metric, we tend to identify these big liars based on the level of reputational notoriety they achieve. A second way of defining big liars involves how often a person lies. We can define big liars as people who lie very frequently. These big liars seem to lie with a predictable regularity that far surpasses the dishonesty of an average person. We can identify these big liars simply by finding those people who lie the most. However, we must find a way to measure how often they lie. Measuring lying. A young woman sat at a cafe enjoying coffee and a good conversation with one of her closest friends. They talked about work, their romantic lives, worries, and plans for the future. They shared and bonded. It was a lovely conversation. When the conversation ended, the young woman took a diary book out of her purse. She jotted down some notes about who her friend was, what they had talked about, and how long the conversation had lasted. She wrote some notes about how many times she had lied.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?